I understand there are internet issues around the. So, good morning to everybody on YouTube who are watching the Council's live stream. Before I formally start the meeting, I will go to each subcommittee member to confirm that they can hear and be heard. This is a legal requirement for me to do so under the Local Authorities and Police and Crime Panels Coronavirus Flexibility of Local Authority and Police and Crime Panel Meetings, England and Wales Regulations 2020. So if you could verbally confirm that you are able to hear me, and I will in turn confirm that I can hear and see you. Where practical, please also have your video switched on so that you can be seen by other members in attendance and the public watching. First of all, Councillor Polly Andrews.
I can see and hear you, Chairman. And could I, at this point, make clear that I know Mrs. Cecil. She was a former head teacher of Homer Primary School, where I was and still am a governor, but there is no close personal relationship.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Could I ask Caroline Marshall, who's clerking the meetings, just to note that in the minutes, please? Thank you.
That's fine, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Fagan.
Good morning, Chair. I can see and hear you.
And are you, Councillor Fagan? Thank you very much. I would also like to request that officers who are presenting throughout the meeting also confirm that they can hear and be heard. First of all, Caroline Marshall, who we've heard from already.
Yes, Chair, I can see and hear you.
And Caroline is the clerk to the meeting. Alice McAlpine, who is our legal advisor this morning.
I can hear and see you, Chair.
And are you, Alice? Thank you very much. We have Sarah Buffery, who's taken over at short notice the technical support of this meeting due to internet failures.
Yes, I can see and hear you, Chair.
And you, Sarah, thank you very much. And finally, from our side, Fred Spriggs, who is from the Licensing Authority.
I can see and hear you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And are you, Fred? Good morning to everybody. The Council is video and audio streaming this meeting live on the internet and making an official recording. This recording forms a part of the public record of the meeting and will be available on the Council's website. Please note that while it is only a legal requirement that you have your audio switched on, it is the Council's preference that, where you are able to do so, that you have your video switched on. Please remember that what you say and do in this meeting has a global reach and your words and actions should be chosen carefully. Can I also remind members to ensure that they are wearing their headsets while listening and speaking during the meeting. This will ensure that the audio quality is of the highest possible quality and the background noise is significantly reduced. As these are extraordinary circumstances, there are some additional points for members and officers to be aware of. As part of our meeting etiquette and in line with our normal committee practices, all microphones apart from mine will be placed on mute at the start and during the meeting. I will run through the agenda then in the customary way. When you wish to speak, please use the hand button against your name in the participants list, which should be on the right of your screens. I will then invite you to speak in order of the hands being raised. Please remember to unmute yourself to speak and mute yourself when you have finished. Please do not raise your physical hand, as I do not wish to miss anybody who may wish to speak. Please note that the chat facility has been switched off to ensure that members' contributions can be offered through the spoken voice and for the public record. Please ensure that all mobile devices are switched off to prevent interference with the audio and video system. If any attendee loses connection, the meeting will be paused as to ascertain if the connection can be restored quickly. If it is not possible to recover the connection within a reasonable amount of time, the meeting will continue as long as a quorum of committee members remains able to hear the proceedings and be heard. If you plan to leave the meeting before the end of the meeting, could you please indicate to me in advance? Where the committee members are required to vote on an item, I will ask each committee member in turn to verbally indicate if they are for, against, or abstaining. The result of the roll call will only be recorded in the minutes of the meeting where there is a requirement to record a named vote. If a committee member has not been present for the whole of the discussion on an item due to a technical failure, they should not vote on that item. Are there any questions on that procedure from anyone before we proceed? Yep, thank you very much. So I will now formally open the meeting after the preamble. Item 1 on the agenda, are there any apologies for absence?
There are no apologies for absence, Chair.
Thank you very much, Caroline. So that means item 2, there are no named substitutes. Item 3, declarations of interest. Councillor Andrews has already pointed out her relationship with Mrs. Cecil, which I believe is some years old. So that can be recorded in the minutes. Caroline, thank you very much. So then we come on to the meat of this meeting this morning, which is an application for the grant of a premises licence in respect of Wild by Nature, Lower House Farm, Longtown, Herefordshire, HR20NT under the Licensing Act 2003. It is to consider an application to grant a premises licence in respect of Wild by Nature at that address. Now, I have some difficulty here in that a lot of the representations that have been made to us by members of the public fall under planning legislation. Now, this may seem absolutely daft, and if you pointed this out to me again, I would agree with you. This is completely bonkers, and I hope for those members of the public listening can quote me or saying this is completely bonkers, because licensing and planning are two completely separate pieces of legislation. That means that the planning committee can decide to grant a permission for somebody with one set of conditions attached, and this committee, as a licensing committee, can grant permission for a license with a completely different set of conditions attached, including those for the hours of operation. It also means that any highways matters outside the immediate vicinity of the licensable area are matters for the planning committee and not this committee. I know it seems daft and I know it seems bonkers, and I would agree with you, but that is the position this committee finds itself in this morning, hearing this application. So I will now call on Mr. Spriggs to give the outline of the application, and bearing in mind what I have said about the demarcation lines.
Apologies, Councillor Southern. We appear to have lost Councillor Fagan.
Can we pause the stream, please, Sarah, and we'll see if we can get information that the live stream has restarted. Welcome back, everybody. A slight technical glitch there. We lost Councillor Fagan into the ether somewhere, but I'm glad to say she's safely found her way back into the meeting. We had got as far as the stage of Mr. Spriggs giving his presentation on the application this morning. So just as a quick recap, this is a premises license application in respect of Wild by Nature at Lower House Farm, Longtown, Herefordshire, postcode HR20NT. Mr. Spriggs, please.
Sorry, Councillor, just before Fred speaks, could Councillor Fagan just confirm that she can hear and be heard?
Yes, thank you. Apologies for that. I lost my connection, but I can see and hear you now.
Thank you, Councillor Fagan, for confirming that. Mr. Spriggs, please.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, this is an application for the grant of a premises licence in respect of Wild by Nature, Lower House Farm, Longtown, Hereford, HR20NT. The recommendation is that the subcommittee determine the application with a view to promoting the licensing objectives in the overall interests of the local community. You should give appropriate weight to the steps that are appropriate to promote those licensing objectives, the representations, including support and information presented by all parties, the guidance issued to the local authorities under Section 182 of the Acts and the Herefordshire Council's Statement of Licensing Policy. There are a number of options open to you and your committee this morning. Firstly, you can grant the license subject to the operating schedule. You can grant the license subject to modified conditions. You can exclude from the scope of the license any of the licensable activities. You can refuse to specify a person as the premises supervisor. And finally, you can reject the application. The application for the grant of the premises license has received relevant representation and is therefore brought before the subcommittee for determination. So this is an application by Wild by Nature LLP, and it is a grant, and the consultation period started on the 3rd of September and concluded on the 30th of September. The initial application requested the following licensable activities, and that was films, live music and recorded music, all indoors and outdoors, Monday to Sunday from midday until midnight. Late night refreshment, again indoors and outdoors, all days from 11 o'clock at night until midnight. And the sale supply of alcohol for consumption on and off the premises, again all days from midday until midnight. However, during the consultation process and after speaking with local residents, the applicant decided to amend that application, and they no longer wish to have outdoor music or outdoor cinemas as an option. And that request can be found at Appendix 2. There's been no representations from responsible authorities. 4 relevant representations have been received from members of the public, and one of these was subsequently withdrawn, which leaves you with 3 remaining representations. There were 13 other representations from members of the public opposing the application, but had to be rejected as they were not relevant. And there were 2 letters of support, which again have been rejected because they're not relevant. Any decision may have an impact on the local community. There are no equality issues in relation to content of this report. And you'll be aware of the human rights implications. There is unlikely to be any financial implication for the authority at this time. As relevant representation has been received, the subcommittee must determine the application under section 3.5.7 bracket C of the Herefordshire Council Constitution. The representations must relate to the licensing objectives, and the subcommittee must determine the likely effect of the grant of the premises licence on the promotion of the licensing objective. You'll be aware of the 4 licensing objectives, and there are a number of stated cases which again you'll be aware of, and I'm sure your legal advisor will provide further information should you require that. There is a right of appeal to the Magistrates Court within a period of 21 days of the applicant and any person who's made representation being served with notice of the decision, and therefore there is little risk associated with the decision at this time. All responsible authorities and members of the public living with Herefordshire have been consulted in respect of the application. You'll find at Appendix 1 a copy of the application, and Appendix 3 the public representations. That is the report, Chair.
Councillor Sultan, you appear to be on mute.
That's the byword for this era. You're on mute, and I fell foul of that one. Thank you, Alice. Yes, thank you, Mr. Spriggs. As there are no representations from the responsible authorities with this authority, I will now go to Mrs. Cecil to make a representation to us, please. I'll come to Mr. Townley later after this. You're on mute, Mrs. Cecil.
Yes. Right.
We can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay. I submitted my representation, and on the basis that it wasn't rejected, I knew a lot of others were. I decided at the hearing to evidence some of the comments that I'd made there. Now, listening to your comments about the areas which are covered by planning and the areas which are covered by licence. I still intend to give you the points that I've made because they're relevant to the geography and the locality of the situation. And I have notes, so I'll try not to read them all, but they're a bit of a prompt until I get in my stride. I then need that reminder. Okay, so the Lower House Farm businesses declare their aim to exist within the beauty of this valley, which they praise within their website and their promotional materials. That aspect of license application information you should have in front of you. She chose not to attend the hearing, I gather, but she says she's given you all the information that you have. So in terms of and etc., she has covered that area. The positive things about what's happened in the last few years at Lower House Farm.
Mrs. Cecil, can I stop you just for a second? We seem to be having problems with your internet connection. Sarah, is there anything we can do from this end to improve Mrs. Cecil's internet connection?
No, it very occasionally flickers off and flickers on. Can you hear me again now?
But intermittently, I'm afraid. Let's see if we can do something from our end.
I think that's the best I can do at the moment, Chair. Ultimately, the only other option might be to switch off the video, but it's at your discretion whether you want to advise that or carry on as we are for now.
Let's see how Mrs. Cecil gets on. So I'm very sorry to interrupt you, but we were getting some interruption in your audio there. So if you carry on, please, and if it happens again, we'll ask you to switch your video off.
Okay. So Lower House Farm has publicised its objective to celebrate the beauty of the valley, to engage in the production of grass-fed meats, to provide a beautiful wedding venue, which they've done, and to diversify their activities from farming to support their young families, which are all things that are part of the neighbourhood plan and the Herefordshire core strategy, I think you'll find, although I know that's a planning strategy, but it is relevant. So that's not a problem. Most of the events that have been hosted at the farm have had very little negative impact on the locality or on their neighbours, and the families have respect for their environment. In fact, they've done a lot of good in that respect. Events like Sunday lunches, steak nights, school fundraisers have taken place without causing any issues with local people. And I believe, Jake can probably confirm this, that he's been very successful producing and marketing grass-fed meats. And the families are embedded in the local community with children at the school. There was one occasion when there was an extreme amount of noise, and Ed, who's one of Jake's partners, made it his business to visit all the neighbours and apologise. And regarding the licensing application, when Ed is the only person I've spoken to from the business, but he was horrified that local people were upset and seemed concerned that relationships should remain good. And following that discussion and what happened at the parish council, he and his partners withdrew that application, as you've heard. So there are also lots of good things, and I don't want you to think that this is an anti-Lower House Farm lobby or personal in any way. There have been one or two issues with the road, which is why I'm concerned about your differentiation between planning and licensing matters, because one is relevant to the other. And reason I'm going to give you my points regarding the situation, because I've taken a lot of time to gather the evidence so that you understand the geography of the locality. The gateway from Lower House Farm goes onto the unclassified road U75001. And the distance between that gate and the junction of the road through Longtown is only 0.23 of a mile. The lane is only wide enough for one vehicle. For example, a Land Rover pulling a stock trailer can't even pass a bicycle on that road. The verges are vertical in most places, making even moving off the road for a pedestrian impossible in lots of the places. The condition is poor, with a deteriorating surface, and the edges are disintegrating. There are 3 90-degree corners in the 0.23 miles between the gate and the junction, and no visibility along the road because of the gradient, the corners, and the height of the hedges. Between the farm gate and the junction with the Longtown Road, the land rises by 53 feet, which I'm sure you can understand makes it a very steep road, as well as having other limitations. And there are only 3 passing places, which are 0.1 and 0.14 miles apart, and each on blind 90-degree corners. Reversing, as you can imagine, is very difficult because of the gradient and the narrow nature. So that is the issue with the road. The road leads down then to the farm gate, and the farm gate takes you to the bottom of the valley where the farm is situated. And that's relevant later for the part about noise, because you can see it's quite a steep valley and therefore acts like the walls of a cone. The existing traffic is already domestic traffic, farm traffic, commercial traffic, and recreational traffic. So things I've listed, the sorts of things that exist on there now regularly: farm, tractors, 4x4s, towing, trailers being towed, horse boxes, delivery vans, JCBs, etc., etc. And the kind of people visiting the area for the purpose of tourism are holiday makers in their cars, walkers, cyclists, and there are minibuses going past that gate which carry groups up to the mountains and take and collect school children. So every journey that anybody embarks on in this area involves having to stop and reverse to a passing place, because there is always somebody coming the other way, and very often vehicles that can't that reverse because they've got a big trailer or some such thing. So an increase in commercial activity in Lower House Farm is necessary for, we understand that, but I think the licensing committee needs to consider the kinds of events that they might do which will not cause danger to the public by the excessive amounts of traffic. Another reason why for the licence, and a factor that's changing at the farm, is the need perceived by the business, which I accept, for weddings to be held on different days of the week. People want flexibility, and they are able to marry on different days now, rather than it being a Saturday kind of event in the past. And that means that the business needs to operate flexibly to accommodate that, which is why I understand the licence is 7 days a week for the hours described. The problem with the weddings is the number of people. I believe, and Jake will probably correct me or amend this later, that approximately 120 people are allowed in the barn because of the fire regulations, and that's the kind of limitation in size of weddings. But that involves increased levels of staff, deliveries, and it involves, as you've heard from the licensing request to serve food late at night, it involves departure of guests at around midnight when the event closes, and therefore the subsequent traffic causing disruption on the way out. Now, the business has been very good, I understand from Ed, in trying to use minibuses to take people to the wedding and to take them home afterwards. Obviously, there's an issue if they've been drinking, and that does mitigate the amount of traffic to some extent. But the point I'm making is that other events which the business plans to increased to cover include more pizzas and steak nights. They're already doing Sunday lunches and other one-off feasts of different kinds. Those events cater for a smaller number of people, and the people's arrival and departure is more staggered than for weddings. So in complete fairness to the business, those kinds of events have very little impact compared with weddings. However, I'm quite sure that weddings are the money spinner. What I want to finish by saying about the road conditions and the safety of the public is that I think for the committee to be fully informed, even if it's possible for it to be referred to planning, more information needs to be gathered than the paltry facts that I've managed to give you about the road condition and the levels of existing traffic. I think those are relevant to the development, the planning of the development of business in the valley. I'd like to move on to noise. The noise from weddings can be a nuisance. It's a party after all, and it makes a huge difference for outdoor music to be withdrawn, because that carries the because of the high mountain on one side and the steep valley the other, there is a tendency for the music to carry right on up through the valley. When events are held inside, as they are when it's cold or the weather's bad, there's very little disruption. Occasionally you can hear the bass, and unless the doors are held open in the summer, that is not too bad. However, I've noted the recommendations that came in your official paperwork about suggestions regarding advising people attending weddings to consider the amount of noise they make when they're outside and going in and out of doors. Those are all. So where my opinions lead from here is that I fully accept the view of Lower House Farm residents that they are young couples with young families, and they don't want to have their families disrupted by lots of noise and parties on too regular a basis. So that's good. I think the outcome of the hearing is to look at the frequency with which weddings are held and to consider what's manageable for the locality, sustainable for the families, and generally makes a minimal impact on the residents of the valley, both on the road and in terms of the noise. And I think it's important that good relationships remain in existence between all neighbours and the families concerned. And I'm sure that will happen, but sometimes you have to work at these things and recognise the impact you're having. So what I think is that one of these possibly away from the wishes of the applicants and the objections that have been made. I think that it was too big an impact for weddings to be held in the same week as other events like evening meals and lunches, etc., and that perhaps there should be a limit on the number of weddings per year, perhaps no more than once a week. That would give scope for them to be on any day, but not more than once a week. And that other events such as the steak nights, pizza nights, etc., and all kinds of imaginative things that they come up with can be had in weeks when there isn't a wedding. And also, I'd like to hope that the business concerned will continue to try and minimise the impact of their cars by using the local minibus service. So those are the two ways in which I think the families can celebrate a successful level of income and the locality can benefit from their presence but not have a negative impact from it. So I hope that comes over as a friendly and indeed a reasonable kind of presentation, designed really to move things. That's the end of what I'd have to say.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Cecil. If I might say, in my experience here as being a chairman of this committee, the key to good relationships between applicants and objectors is communication. And if that can be maintained at a satisfactory level, I'm sure we can come to you can all come to an amicable state where you can all coexist together in a good way. Mr. Townley, please.
Thank you, Chair. And
sorry, Chair.
It's rare that both of us jump in, Councillor Selden. Before Mr. Townley speaks, there is another public representation who did submit a notice of intent to speak. They are sharing the same Zoom screen. So if you could invite that person to speak next.
I do beg your pardon, because it did cross my mind as I was listening to Mrs. Cecil, and it went completely out again. So we have Mr. Mangley just sitting behind you. If we, or Mrs. Mangley, I beg your pardon. I do beg your pardon.
That's quite all right. Thank you very much for inviting me. A lot of what I really have to say has been already said by Mrs. Cecil. I'm very keen that we should, if possible, work with Lower House to iron out the things that that are of some concern. From my point of view, my most pressing concerns are about the road, which I'm not sure if we are going to deal with this here, because as you've said, it is really more of a planning issue. But this little road, which is, as Judy has said, single width and no passing places, and these two sharp bends, it serves 15 properties, most of which are farms. And obviously, that's going to involve vehicles towing livestock trailers, tractors, and that sort of thing. And these vehicles during the summer months particularly are working through the nights. Now, I am concerned about the amount of traffic that would be coming onto the road and coming on late at night as well. They don't know the road, and if you meet another vehicle, there are no street lights, obviously, and a lot of people can't reverse, and especially uphill. So this is something that really needs to be considered. I see in the application that they are asking for up to 120 people. That really is going to assume about 50 cars, I would have thought. I know that there has been the idea of using minibuses, but a minibus only carries about 14 people, which means you're going to have a fleet of minibuses. And again, these coming in and meeting vehicles towing, or just local people trying to get out to the village. This road is the only road from that end of it in and out of the village. We don't have another option unless you go about 4 miles around. So that my main concern is with the road. It's such a narrow road, and if we're going to have groups of cars arriving, again, if they meet someone, for 4 or 5 vehicles to try and reverse back uphill, we're talking burning clutches here, I think. They've got to reverse a long way back to get to the T-junction, and even then to go back out onto the main road in the village. The road there is only single width. So I think it needs a lot of careful consideration about the traffic. I also have an issue with the traffic. There is a cottage called Swallow Cottage, which is on the corner of the T-junction to the village. These vehicles, this cottage is a holiday cottage and a future home for its owners. At the moment, it enjoys a high occupancy, and it's a successful little business. If we have large numbers of vehicles leaving the farm at midnight, 1 o'clock, all their headlights are going to be flashing through this cottage, through the windows, because it is right on the road. And every vehicle is going to have to stop at that junction with its engine idling while they decide to turn out of there. I feel this is going to be a real problem for that cottage and their business. And to be honest, it only takes 1 or 2 bad reports on Trustpilot and that little business could disappear. So I do feel that some consideration must be given to them when we talk about the numbers that might be allowed at these weddings. We're assuming that it's the weddings that are going to be the bigger numbers, but it could be just parties, birthday parties, etc. I'm also concerned about the amount of traffic that was going to come up through the village. Obviously, we're still talking about this big number of vehicles. 120 people is a lot of people. I know that they've been running events for quite some time, but I think on a much smaller basis, and they've not been any problem at all. I think we've managed around that. But with a big number of vehicles, possibly 50, they're all going to be coming in within I would say an hour and a half of each other. There is a 30-mile-an-hour limit on the village road, but it does have a lot of pinch points. There are no pavements, there are no streets. If you've got your children or whatever. This is going to pose a lot of additional danger, I feel, to those people wandering up the road. We're a mountain village, and you know, we have groups of walkers, cyclists, family groups on trips. These vehicles may be coming in at lunchtime. They may be coming in the middle of the afternoon because people get married in the daytime. So they're not just going to be coming in the evening. And if they come up the village, there's nowhere for you much to dodge out of the way of cars. I think really that this would need to be looked at. If we're looking at these big numbers, it would need to be looked at much more carefully, possibly by the Highways Department, just to ascertain what the dangers are. Often, you know, there are groups wandering up the road, they stop, they stand talking, they're quite oblivious to the traffic because they think they're out in the middle of a country village. So I think that side of things, whilst it is out of the curtilage of the farm, it is all interlinked, because if you're going to say, yes, you can have much bigger numbers to your parties and everything, they've all got to get there. They're not just going to drop in. They've all got to come to the farm. And so I think we need to have a look at that. There isn't going to be a lot of advantages to the community from these events, because obviously the events have all been paid for to Wild by Nature. There may be the odd bit of B&Bs booked, but mostly this is just going to be traffic coming through the village. And the village really is only going to gain, to be blank, noise, fumes and vehicles, and possible risk to anybody on the road. I entirely understand the need for diversification. I farm, and I found that myself. I think we must make every effort to integrate this venture successfully without causing disharmony and frustration with the neighbours and the locals. We live in a lovely place and we all get on really well. About 3/4 of the properties on that road are farms. We all work with each other, we do a bit for each other, a bit of contracting and all sorts of things. We are a very interlinked community, and we all get on pretty well. And I think it is really important that we try and iron out these things, these glitches that we're worried about, so that we don't we can just get through them, really. From my own point of view, I think that if we could keep these big events to perhaps once a fortnight, and not as high as 120 people, I just feel the traffic level from that will be too much for that little road and fridge. Even if you use minibuses, they only carry about 14 people. So you're going to need a fleet of buses coming up there. The road is always in poor condition, and this amount of traffic isn't going to help that very much. Unfortunately, the road is very low on the council's priority list, so we have to wait a good while to get any work done to it.
Mrs. Madley, I'm Mandley, I beg your pardon. I am going to stop you there. The difficulty we have with this committee this morning is that we are here to hear the licensing application for the program, and the hybrid issues fall outside that application. As I said at the very outset, it is not a happy situation for us to be in, to have to make a decision on this without taking into consideration of any highways issues, but that is the situation we find ourselves in at this point. So is there anything else that you'd like to say about, like, for instance, the licensing objectives?
No, I don't. I think as the license has checked, their objectives have changed, and they've withdrawn the music part of it and the cinema part of it. I'm much more reassured about that. But unfortunately, I just feel that these two issues of the size and the number of these events and how people are going to get to it are so interlinked that I really can't see how a decision can be drawn without taking both sides into account.
Thank you very much, and I think you've made the points very, very ably, and thank you for that. I think we'd like to now hear from Mr. Townley and to see if there's any common ground that we can find between yourself, Mrs. Cecil, and the business. So I'm going to ask Mr. Townley to speak next, and we'll then adjourn to make a decision on this application. Mr. Townley.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for your representations. In terms of, clearly there's an issue here with traffic and road issues, and I completely understand that issue, although I think it sounds from this like that's a separate discussion that we need to have. In regards to the license application, the noise that Judy mentioned, we're fully aware that the weddings do have the potential to cause a noise issue, which is the main reason why we applied for this license was not necessarily an intensification of what we were doing. Our main objective was to have more control over what happens here to prevent any issues occurring. That was our main concern, and the main reason, alongside as well making them hopefully more profitable. In terms of advantage for people locally, as you mentioned, there is the accommodation factor. We do also provide good quality jobs for local people, and we're very proud of that. I fully echo both of your intention in terms of your goodwill and the wish to achieve a mutual resolution to this. And I would like to thank you both for your representations, and that's, I think, everything else we've sort of covered in our written representation, so thank you. Oh, I think you're on mute, Chairman.
You're on mute, Councillor Selden.
Thank you, Mr. Townley, and thank you to Mrs. Cecil and Mrs. Manley. Members, do you have any questions for either the applicant or the objectors? Councillor Andrews?
No, I don't think so. I think it's all clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fagan?
No, I don't have questions. I think I welcome the opportunity for all those parties involved to actually really sit down and have a good and thorough discussion about how the issues that we can't address can be addressed by them. But no questions, thank you.
Well, I would sincerely hope that that will happen after this meeting, and that there will be regular meetings between the venue and the residents nearby. Right. We are going to depart slightly from established procedure here, in that we are going to ask the non-members of the committee to go into the waiting room because of our internet issues we're having in Herefordshire this morning. We can't use a separate meeting room. So if I could ask that Mrs. Madley, Mrs. Cecil and Mr. Townley with Mr. Spriggs and Sarah are placed into the waiting room, then we will consider our decision in that space while you're in the waiting room. So Sarah, if you could place those people in the waiting room, please.
Councillor Selden, could you request that the live stream be paused at this point?
Thank you very much for that, Caroline. Sarah. Thank you, and welcome back to everybody watching on YouTube. In order to comply with the COVID regulations, I now have to go to everybody who was placed in the waiting room to confirm that they can hear and be heard. Can I start with Mrs. Cecil? Could you unmute yourself?
Now. Yes, we can hear you.
And Mrs. Manley?
Yes. Yes. We're both together.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Mr. Townley?
I can see and hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Townley. And finally, Mr. Spriggs from the Licensing Authority.
Yes, Chair, I can see and hear you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience. As a preamble, I have to say that once again, that it is due to the regulations that we are unable to take the highways matters into consideration when reaching a decision on this case. I'd also say that the decision we've come to is based purely on the evidence presented to us today and not on anything that might happen in the future. So our decision goes thus. We have heard from the Licensing Authority, written public representations, and from the applicant. We note that the business is acknowledged to be well run and engages well with the local community. With that in mind, we are minded to grant the application with the following informative. The applicant should give advance notice of 10 working days of any event involving over 100 people wherever possible. That is the decision of the committee. Thank you all for your attendance this morning. We will go on to the next item in just a few moments. Mrs. Madley and Mrs. Cecil and Mr. Townley, you may leave us should you wish.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know.
The second application before us today is on 8 on our agenda, which is the grant of an application premises licence in respect of Bromyard Service Station, number 1, the bypass, Bromyard HR74DJ. Mr. Spriggs, you have some news for us.
I think, being honest, as I was a representee, I think that would be better if your legal advisor commented on it.
Yes,
please.
I'll confirm. So Councillor Selden, following discussions with the licensing authority and the applicant, an additional condition has been agreed for the licence, and the licence was granted under the delegated powers given to the licensing team under the Herefordshire Council Constitution.
Okay, so thank you very much. So that decision has been made. Okay. With that in mind, everybody, I thank everybody for your attendance this morning and say a very good day to you, those watching on YouTube. Could the live stream now be